Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Iris Fox, and I want to extend a warm welcome to the Rough Edges podcast. Rough Edges exists to provide mental health education as well as faith-based messages in order to inspire growth and foster healing. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. My hope is that this podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness in order to bring growth and healing in our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today's episode is very near and dear to my heart because it signifies that Rough Edges has hit a year of being on streaming platforms. And I am just over the moon at this development because it not only shows that with hard work and persistence, you can make something happen, but it also shows the level of growth that has come over this past year. Now, I remember when I first started recording my first episode, I remember that it was 8 minutes and 52 seconds, not even a full 10 minutes worth of an episode, and I was freaking out. I thought, oh no, I can't even reach the 10-minute mark. How am I going to publish this episode? But in the end, I decided to be real and raw, and I wanted people to hear my story and not just hear elements of it, but just hear the whole thing from start to finish. I even remember the intro that I wanted to play for this podcast, and it is nothing like the intro that I currently have. But why don't you take a listen to what could have been the intro to Rough Edges. Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges. I'm your host, Sarah Fox, and in this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. In this episode, I will give a brief introduction into how I started this podcast, how the title came about, and I'll also share a poem that I wrote, which aligns with the theme for the podcast. Stay tuned for more. Wow. Talk about an intro. I mean, I used stock recordings from YouTube to try and get some, jazzy intro music. And I thought to myself, what am I doing? As I was picking the music, I was sitting there for almost an hour trying to figure out what would make a good, warm introduction to the podcast. And I also wanted it to have a very upbeat, very hip, very, fresh type of intro. And that's what I landed on. But that was before I found Anchor. And I largely have to thank my mentor, Marilette, for introducing me to Anchor because it has just made my life so much easier. And I also owe a great deal of gratitude to my support system, especially to my friends, especially Lydia Vreeman, shout out to her, who have just encouraged me to actually do this. And it's something that I've never even thought I wanted to do. I never thought I wanted to do a podcast. It never even crossed my mind. And I had so many reasons and excuses as to why I couldn't just sit down and record my voice for X amount of minutes to give inspirational messages to others. And I did have a lot of fears. because putting your life out on a public platform is not an easy thing to do. I was so terrified because I was still ashamed of my story. I was still ashamed of me having bipolar disorder. I was still ashamed that I wasn't at the place where I could stand and say that I've arrived. And honestly, nobody can say that. Nobody can say that they have arrived. But in my mind, I thought, well, if I'm going to have a podcast, I need to make sure that I have a healing story. And I need to make sure that that story had an end. I thought there's no way that I could have a platform like this and still be in the middle of my story. And I have to attribute this to the Lord's sovereignty and just his wisdom and foresight to be able to show me that even though I'm still a work in progress, I still have a story to tell. I still have a testimony that can bless the lives of many people. And I really didn't think that I could be sitting here recording my voice a year later and having done it for over 30 episodes now, and just to look back and think about all the guests that I have talked to, all the episodes I have published, and just all of the topics that I was able to sit down and talk about with such great and powerful guests who have been willing to just share their stories with me. And I just have to say that that is the hand of God, because if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have even had this type of platform to express myself and to give mental health advice and education in the way that I did over this past year. And honestly, even though I'm being very transparent right now, but even though my podcast hasn't brought in thousands upon thousands of listeners each month, I am still grateful that hundreds of people are listening. And even though it may seem like a small number right now, I know that God will bring the increase. And that was another fear of mine. I didn't think that people would actually want to listen. I didn't think that people actually wanted to give me the time of day. Because one, they don't know me. And two, what could I possibly have to offer them? A girl with bipolar 1 disorder who literally just got out of the hospital a couple months ago. Like, at the time, I should clarify that. But at the time, when I was about to record my first episode, I was like, what do I have to offer to the world? Who would listen to me? Why would they want to listen to me? And I just had so many doubts. And I put that in the first ever episode because I wanted people to know that, hey, I'm a human being. And that sometimes I doubt myself. Sometimes I think that I don't have anything to offer the world. And although I know that that's not true, deep down inside, I know that those are lies. I sometimes think that my story is not going to help anyone. And I want you guys to take a listen to that moment of hesitancy before I started my podcast from the first episode. So, let me be honest. Starting a podcast wasn't always part of the plan. Aside from a few friends telling me that I should start one, I never really had a desire to start a podcast, especially since most people already had one, and I hate hearing my voice on recordings. No, seriously. I always tell myself, how do I even have friends who want to listen to this voice all day? Anyway, after listening to podcasts from other mental health activists, close friends, and other artists who inspire me, I decided, why not start a podcast? Why not start a podcast that marries faith and mental health? Why not explore these things and how they work together for the further growth and healing of everyone around? So, here we are. Well, there you have it. I wanted to start this podcast as a way of instituting growth and healing into the lives of others. And I was meeting with someone who was very curious about my why for starting this podcast. Like, why start this podcast? What do you want to do with this platform? And my response was, I wanted to touch the lives of other people. I want to make an impact in someone's life. Even if I don't know the extent of the impact, I want others to be able to come away from this podcast knowing that there is hope for a brighter day. I want them, even if they listen to like 5 seconds or 2 minutes of the podcast, I want people to walk away knowing that they have the strength and that they can push towards healing, wholeness, and wellness in their lives. And that desire has honestly given me some perspective. It has changed the way that I thought about mental health issues, and it has also transformed the way that I experience mental health in my own life. For example, after I started Rough Edges, I was more into just the research about mental health. I figured if I'm going to do this podcast, might as well research about mental health. And as I was doing my mental health research, I realized the lack of availability of these resources to people in impoverished neighborhoods, people who just got diagnosed with a mental illness. It's just extensive, the list of people that don't have access. And we like to think, oh yeah, it's on the internet. Like, of course you have access. But the depth of finding books, finding blogs, finding podcasts, it wasn't available to me at the click of a button, because when I first got diagnosed, I didn't know where to look for resources. Aside from the packet that they gave me in the hospital about my bipolar disorder, I didn't know where else to look in terms of like getting help or getting information or even just getting the help that I needed. I had no other mode of research besides the packet and the therapist that I was assigned to at the time. And that just was very surprising to me. I didn't understand why this valuable information wasn't accessible to people who needed it the most, especially people who were just diagnosed and didn't know where to turn. And when I thought about that, I was like, you know what? I need to do this podcast now. I need to talk about these resources. I need to share this information with others, because if I don't, who else will? And the thing is, I'm not trying to say that I'm the savior of everybody with a mental health condition, or I'm the face of the mental health advocacy movement and all that. No. But I'm saying is that it would be a great disservice to my peers. It would be a great disservice to people who I don't even know who are struggling with this and suffering in silence. It would be a great disservice to them if I don't speak out about these issues and also raise awareness and provide education for people who don't even know what their diagnosis actually is, for people who don't know the extent of the side effects of their medication, of the symptoms of their diagnosis, of the triggers that they can get into once they get the diagnosis. I mean, there's just so many things that I knew that I wanted to talk about, but at the same time, I knew that my ability to do my research was limited. And I knew that I needed to invite other people into this space, into this platform, to talk about their experiences with mental health. And I'm so grateful that I've had so many amazing guests. And if you're listening right now, you know exactly who you are. You have just enriched my life in such a way where I have totally had a new perspective about mental health. And you guys have even encouraged me in terms of just going forward and even taking care of myself and doing the hard work that it takes to move through your healing journey and to see yourself as being whole at the end of it. And I just am so grateful for the community that I've built over this past year, and for those who have cheered me on every step of the way. Friends, family, even the people that I've met, my guests, like, you guys are awesome. And I just hope to strengthen the bonds that I have with each of you. And I also hope that you guys can come back and share more about your experiences on the podcast. So I thank you for that. And I also want to talk about how Rough Edges has just helped me not only heal from the doubts, heal from the insecurities, heal from the shame, but it has also reframed my perspective on what healing truly means. And the reason why I called this podcast Rough Edges, and not realizing that a lot of other podcasts had the same name, but I called this podcast Rough Edges because it is all about our humanity. It is all about how God can use even the roughest, toughest, most jagged edges in the world. He can use that for good. And so take a listen as to how the name Rough Edges came about and what the title signifies for this podcast. I also learned while writing this poem that your edges are what make you you. It's not a burden or a curse. It's part of human nature. Although I sometimes feel down, I know that there's hope for healing and change. And I pray that there will be hope in your life as well. Rough Edges is all about hope. And my goal in continuing this podcast is for that hope to be spread on a macro level, for that hope to just reach every corner of the world. And I know that sounds corny, I know that sounds cheesy, but I really want this podcast to be instrumental in transformational healing for the entire world. And I'm just going to say this in faith, but I believe that God can use this platform as an instrument for redemption and for healing for everyone in this world, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what your diagnosis is, there is hope for healing. And I don't know who is listening right now, but this is for you. You are worth the time that healing takes. You are worth every ounce of hope that can be poured out into your life. You are worth the fight. You are worth the time. You are worth the effort that healing takes. You are just worth so much more than what your doctor is telling you, what your diagnosis is telling you, what your circumstances are telling you, what your own mind is telling you. You are worth more than the negative self-talk. You are worth more than the self-doubt, the insecurity, the fear, the shame. You are worth wholeness. You are worth wellness. You are worth a sound mind. You are worth healing. You are worth the warmness that you feel when you know deep within yourself that you have made it through the valley, that you have made it through the tough times, that you have made it through the battle that is in your own psyche. You are worth it. And I just want to leave you guys with this note that healing takes time. It takes a lot of time. But I know one thing. When you experience that feeling of being touched by the healing power of God, you will never be the same. So I encourage you all to keep on going. And if this podcast has helped you in any way, let me know. And I look forward to the future of this podcast. And I look forward to many, many, many more years to come. Because I believe deep down inside that the absolute best is yet to come. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. This podcast is available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and more. For more updates on the Rough Edges podcast, please follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast. You can also visit the official podcast website at www.roughedgespodcast.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions for how this podcast can grow, please email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful day.